Divorced Redditors. What is the craziest thing you or your former spouse did after divorce? She called my company. Talked her way up the chain to the president of the company. Still don't know how she managed that. But she's smart. And told him I was suicidal and had threatened to do something drastic at work. Later I learned that she thought this would be a roundabout way of getting my address, which I didn't share with her after I moved out because she's batshit crazy. My ex-husband started dating his stepmom, who has been in his life since he was 11 years old. His stepmom and him are still together almost 5 years later. His stepmom confessed her love of my ex to his dad a few years ago and they have since divorced. The dad is now dating a 21-year-old. I know all of this because I'm still close friends with my ex-husband's sister. It's so messed up and I'm so grateful I left him when I did. Wife cheated on me. When I confronted her, she grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened me. I told her to go ahead. She put it in my chest just deep enough to draw blood and cut down to my belly button. I hit her on top of her head. She fell to the ground. I left and, after signing papers, never saw her again. It's been 24 years now. My ex has done a shit ton of weird stuff, thankfully most of it not aimed at me. While we were separated and working on our divorce, he would come whine to me about relationship issues. With my cousin, with whom he'd had an affair and for whom he'd left me. Mind you, he'd moved in with not just her but her common-law husband. And then was upset by how many other boyfriends she had. This is my cousin who has more baby daddies than she has babies. 2 of her offspring are simultaneously half-brothers and cousins. She's never been known for her monogamy, in other words, but he claimed to have been in love with her since they were children, and this was magically supposed to make her return his affections. Among the best witnessed from a distance bits of this nonsense were him getting jealous of her visiting her husband and running her off the road in his work van, and generally hanging around screwing her instead of taking jobs, to the extent that there were trainees making more money than he was after he'd been there more than a year and he was eventually invited to resign or be fired. Then there was the time he was doing armed security and, angry at how taking our children on a first date to Austin, he expected to be allowed to stay over at this woman's apartment with his children and her children, and she was rightly horrified at the whole thing. Didn't go over well. Had an argument with his girlfriend at the time, not my cousin, but the ex-wife of a different cousin, and drove to her house in his work vehicle to threaten her with a gun. This resulted in a firing, a restraining order, and loss of his right to carry a gun. Then there was the girlfriend who insisted that if he really loved her, he'd move into the homeless shelter with her. So he fabricated being kicked out of his parents' house and spent the requisite month sleeping outside on the shelter's patio before intake, then spent years longer than the relationship living in the shelter, only finally leaving to move in with a woman he'd met a month earlier, after ostentatiously asking our children's permission. As you can imagine, they felt they had no choice. Basically it's been 13 years of reeling from one relationship to the next, all overlapping, and the kids pulled into them from the very first second. He's currently trying desperately to find another girlfriend to move in with, as the current one is kicking him out to move to Virginia with a new boyfriend of her own. This after some time of subjecting the kids to loud arguments over his porn addiction and their dead sex life, and naturally blaming me for the fact that his 2 oldest children both refused to talk to him at all. 2 of my shortcomings as a wife, by the way, were being too classy. He quoted Confederate Railroad to me, and not providing the drama he felt requisite in a relationship. Called me and pretended he had been hit by a car while we were talking. He even tried to voice the crowd that had gathered around his body. God-awful acting, but pretty funny listening to him try to mimic a woman's voice. Points for trying to be inclusive, I guess. I think he was trying to get me to relive my trauma of being on the phone with a friend who actually had been hit by a car while we were talking. Too bad he didn't realize that hearing the real thing is worlds different than hearing a dumbass try to act it out. Took the sodas from the fridge as he walked out the door. Dumbfounded. Stalked me for 5 years. Would make fake social media profiles to try to follow me, which I would block endlessly, and would try to find where I worked so she could talk to me. This lady cheated on me with 7 different men 2 months after we were married. I kicked her ass to the curb and made her sign the court papers. When we had our day in court, she cried in the judge's office while I just wanted to get this shit done. After, My dad was with me and he threw $50 at her and told her to change your fucking last name. Good guy, Pops. I haven't seen or heard from her in about 5 years, thank goodness. Final straw that led to the divorce. Got drunk and drove her car into the middle of the desert. Sent her friend a picture of the GPS and said I didn't love her so I wouldn't come and look for her. She wouldn't answer my calls but kept calling her friend saying I didn't care. I looked for 2 hours before going back home because I needed to work in the morning. She came home and started banging things around and came into our room and threw her phone at me saying I didn't love her. Punched me in the face multiple times and went to jail. After I filed for divorce she lost it. CPS wouldn't let her kids stay at the house because of the DV charge against her so they stayed at her parents'. She purposely stayed at the house so that I couldn't see my kids. I refused to be alone with her after for fear that she would hurt herself and blame me so I always went to the house with someone if I needed anything. She got tired of this and decided to just remove everything from the house while I was at work. I mean everything that wasn't in my kids' bedrooms she took out of the house. Curtains, ceiling fans, all of the furniture minus the dining table that I don't think she had room for. I thought well this sucks but at least she's gone so I changed the locks. She broke in and stole the locks the next day while I was at work, left nothing but the holes in the doors to swing open in the wind, took the window locks, cut the power cord to the garage door opener, took the blender that I borrowed from my mom and popped the air mattress that I borrowed to sleep on. Then she flipped off the main breaker to the house, swore to the judge that someone else must have done it. All I wanted was custody of my son. I gave her everything else except one of our cars. She fought me through 5 hearings. I won. She never came to see him again. Died of a drug overdose. To be fair, her drug addiction was the reason for the divorce, so maybe that isn't too crazy. When I told my ex-husband I wanted a divorce, the next day after I went to work he packed our entire house into a U-Haul and put it in storage. Even with a court order he refused to give my stuff back. I left my marriage with the clothes on my back. Years later he decided he was above the courts because he got away with that and took our son across country telling me he was moving with 1 day notice and told me I couldn't do anything about it. Of course I promptly hired a lawyer and we went back to court and he lost joint custody but it took a year of fighting, chasing him down, and not seeing my son. There are more stories but those are probably the worst. Prior to divorce, he established a pattern of asking me to sleep with someone else, usually MFF threesomes, usually friends of his, mine, ours, getting increasingly demanding, moody until I conceded, then reacting with extreme insecurity, jealousy, possessiveness, and need for reassurance afterwards until it happened again. It destroyed me as well as all of my in-person friendships and I still don't understand why he needed to go through that psychodrama over and over, or why I didn't leave sooner. To clarify, there is nothing wrong with swinging, polyamory, or ethical non-monogamy. But he really just wanted an on-demand porn service, and couldn't take no for an answer, and could not stand the thought of me having feelings for anyone other than him, yet consistently thought I was waiting to cheat on him or abandon him. Shortly before I filed for divorce, he broke into my apartment twice, once because he wasn't done talking, and then because the apartment complex director told him I couldn't legally kick him out of the apartment, sexually assaulted me while I was sleeping, called the cops and DCF because I blocked him on Messenger after close to 24 hours of nonstop texting from him, and chose to publicly throw a couple of punches and an energy drink at the, still concussed, TBI survivor he'd chosen as my most recent sex partner, as if any of this was that person's fault. Then he assaulted me in the backyard while refusing to leave, and told the police I had attacked him. I filed a restraining order and divorce on the same day. 4 months after our divorce was finalized and he was granted full custody of our 3 kids for every school vacation, he decided to move halfway across the country to live with his mother. She's still taking care of him. His kids aren't particularly interested in talking to him and haven't seen him in over a year. I offered to pay for him to stay here over the summer so he could see them, but he said nah. This is a fair reflection of his level of engagement with his kids prior to divorce, too. I don't doubt that he loves them, but he rarely chooses to spend time with them, because it's stressful. The cops, lawyers, Office of Child Support employees, and the judge have all responded the same way to his endless victim spiel, a tired sigh, a roll of the eyes. He continues to think his situation is everyone else's fault and totally unique. He follows me here, and has quoted some of my posts in court. Hi Brian. Ada. Thanks for the upvotes. Let me know if you've had a similar experience. He's texted to call me a lying whore yet again. I've invited him to respond here. Or please quit stalking my social media, as I've asked, or accept that we have different ideas of how things went. But we'll see. While we were still married, she gets pregnant with the guy she was cheating on me with, who is also married to someone else. She has this idea that he's going to leave his wife and they're going to get married. She got a lawyer and filed for divorce. I get a lawyer too. Only thing is that he works for his wife's father, who is setting him up to take over when daddy retires. He realized that getting a divorce means his cushy career is over, confesses everything to his wife and begs for her forgiveness. His wife takes him back and he cuts off my wife. Seeing that her dreams of living with her BF are over, she claims that I'm the father, which is impossible because by that time, we hadn't had sex for more than a year before conception. This does not stop her from telling everyone who will listen that it's my kid. She has her lawyer drop the divorce proceedings. I tell my lawyer to start them with me as the plaintiff and that I want to dispute paternity. I move out. She starts stalking me, shows up at my job and tries to get in. I work as a civilian in R&D at a military base. The MPs do not take any of her shit and wind up detaining her when she tries to run past the gate. She calls me at work to bail her out or something. I tell her that whatever she's done, it's not my problem, and hang up. I also was able to get a restraining order, which she violated repeatedly. She asked for everything. Both cars, the entire house and contents, savings, my retirement account, etc. Plus 7 years of spousal support. I offered no support and half of the assets. If she wanted to house, she'd have to buy me out and refinance in her name only. When the kid was born, she tried to put my name on the birth certificate anyway, but I'd already successfully disputed paternity, so that didn't go over well. She had to go after Loverboy, who was definitely less than happy to see her. In the end, we split the assets 50-50, sold the house, and she got no spousal support. I don't know if she was able to get money for the kid from Loverboy or not. She called me a few times after the divorce, wanting to get together and talk. The calls were in violation of the restraining order, but I never reported it. About 6 months after the divorce was final, I was offered a new job on the other side of the country. I took it and never told anyone outside of my family where I was going. Almost all of our friends believed her when she claimed the baby was mine and made me out to be the asshole, so I didn't really feel the need to tell them anything. Life is better now. We remained on good terms and still celebrate holidays and birthdays as a family. His 2 youngest kids, with his current wife, call me aunt, and my youngest calls him uncle. I looked at the question, chuckled and thought, this ought to be funny with some crazy stories. Nope. Now I just feel sad. Some of this is so upsetting. She got custody of our 3 kids, got 70% of my take-home pay for child support, requiring me to move into the barracks. I was in the USAF. Then she immediately moved out of state without telling me, despite the divorce decree requiring my consent, all but guaranteeing I would have no contact with my kids. That's not the crazy part. The crazy part is just a few years later she decided she didn't want to be a mother anymore, so she signed up with a carnival. I think she had the hots for one of the ride operators, and left the girls on their own without telling me or the girls beforehand. She called my oldest daughter a few days after leaving to tell her to call me. They hadn't called me before that because they had apparently grown accustomed to their mother disappearing for days at a time. Edit. Some have asked what's happened since. This was decades ago. My children are all grown and married, with their own children. They all learned after coming to live with me that I wasn't the monster their mother had brainwashed them to believe I was, and they all agreed to be adopted, as adults, by the light of my life, my wife, whom I would never have met if I hadn't been divorced. Only one of my children has any contact with her mother, mainly because my daughter still lives near where she grew up. That's where her husband and his family live, so that's where she'll stay. The best outcome of all. All of my children had the best example in the world of how not to be a mother, and consequently all 5 of my grandchildren are having the best childhoods possible. Smiley face. Not me but my so. His ex-wife got married a few days after receiving the court's final decision on the annulment of marriage case. In our country, we don't have divorce. Well, okay, he has moved on already. Now her new husband plans to have his marriage to her annulled too. She removed the retaining clips for my windshield wipers, but put the wipers back on the arms. First storm after I got my car back from her. Driver's side wiper flew off the car on Interstate 40. Good times. After he realized I was never going back, he told his mom that I had been stealing from the family the whole time we were together. Then he literally put it in writing that I had a key to his parents' home and would sneak in and take his dad's guns and his grandmother's jewelry, and that he had been powerless to stop me. It was always his druggy sister. Always. Anyone with eyes could see it, but no one in the family wanted to believe it. My ex-wife told me I could leave my stuff in our house while I found somewhere else to stay. I assumed this was a goodwill effort to keep things as amicable as possible between us. When I went to get my shit, she had burned it all. So that was rough. Kidnapped the kids during their weekend visit and moved to a small town in the next state over. It took me 2 years to get them back. Laundry list, but my favorite was his sister sent a Facebook message to all of his contacts the day of our separation, including my family. Before we announced anything, her message stated everyone should immediately delete me, and if I said anything about why we separated I was lying and not to listen. Basically, this created a lot of curious questions and a lot of laughs. Called me on my birthday 2 years after divorce, offering to make it special, and was quite insistent that I take her up on that opportunity. Was not amused to find out my GF, now wife, had heard the entire conversation on speaker. And #X200B. Good times. Kidnapped my 3 boys from my house when I went on my first post-divorce date. Our loved and trusted babysitter was with them. I left dinner ready and kids bathed and already in their jammies. Left for the movie theater when I got a text from my babysitter that she was sorry for not doing the dishes after dinner. So I texted back, "That's okay. I can do dishes later, but you've got a couple hours as well. The movie hasn't started yet." She was at home as my ex-husband had shown up, lied and said he was supposed to have the boys that night and that I had said it was okay. I was livid. I knew he was a bit crazy, but I had no idea he was capable of this. I stepped out of the theater, called him, and he said, "If you are going to be dating strangers and endangering the lives of my kids, I will take them." WTF. So I called the police. They did a report. We went to court and he was found in contempt for violating our parenting plan. Thanks for watching. See you later.